Alright, folks, we're going to do a quick recap here. This isn't going to take too long. There aren't many games to go over. We had 3 other games here. I'm just going to quickly go over what I got right, what I got wrong. Let's go right into it. We've got the Bills versus Denver. Yeah, it was a close game. I got to admit I was wrong. Bo Nix, I underestimated him, underrated him. Great game from Bo Nix. A lot of people are saying it was the best game any quarterback had in the divisional round. I was I was surprised. I really thought McDermott's pass defense was gonna give him a hard time, and it didn't. He was able to pick it apart to some extent. There was a lot of good throws. A lot of. It's really the best I'd ever seen Bo Nix play. So credit where it's due. If it wasn't for Bo Nix making those throws, obviously also the Rams. Sorry, the Rams. What am I talking about? The Bills turned the ball over 4 times. Josh Allen turned the ball over 4 times. And I really thought that fumble that happened right before the half. I was under the impression, like when I first saw the play, it looked like Josh Allen intentionally threw the ball down behind him. So I thought he was thought it was like a misguided attempt to do sort of a what do they call that? Those I don't remember what they're called, but this those sort of hope and a prayer type of plays where you throw the ball backwards and hope somebody else gets it, moves it forward. It wasn't until I saw the replay later that I realized that the Broncos defender, I guess it was this Petonio guy, reached around and knocked the ball out of his hands, because the way his hand was moving, it looked as if that Josh Allen just tossed the ball back behind him, and in reality, it only looked that way because his arm was coming forward when the dude knocked it out of his hand. So that fumble was pretty huge. I knew at the time. I was like, oh, this doesn't bode well. Denver's defense did not look like Denver's defense, against a team that a lot of people say had no offensive weapons on the Bills. The Bills were able to move the ball consistently, both in the run game and the pass game, which potentially bodes well for my Pats in the championship game. This did not look like I don't remember seeing Allen get sacked a lot. Again, I didn't pay that close attention to this game. I did watch it. It was a good game. I think I went to go get pizza actually with my cousin when the game was on. So it was like we were watching it on a phone because the pizza place was going to close. We had to go get pizza near the end of the game. It was not ideal. But that was just how it timed out. So I wish I could have seen the end of the game more clearly. But yeah, I mean, it seemed as if Buffalo. The big issue for Buffalo, I think, was just that their defense didn't step up. I thought that McDermott was some kind of pass coverage wizard based on how well the Bills dominated the Patriots. Maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe it was a bad game plan on the day the Patriots lost, or maybe there was just something that got. I had said in my preview of this game that I thought if McDermott could flummox Drake May, that he'd be able to do it to Bo Nix. But I don't know what the difference is. But somehow he didn't get through to Bo Nix in the same way, which came as a surprise to me. Bo Nix was one of the best players in this game. And, you've got the questionable calls everyone talks about. I'm going to say that, I saw what could be called pass interference on all the pass interference calls. I saw, the guy was grabbing the guy's legs. I don't think, is that really allowed? It just seemed like in all those situations with the pass interference calls that the defender was playing the receiver more than playing the ball. That's what I look for more than anything. And it looked to me like in all those cases there was, I know that there's some optionality in terms of when to call pass interference, and sometimes, um, sometimes it's a subjective type of call. But I don't think Buffalo fans are all up in arms about these calls. I don't know. I think the pass interference calls were fair. It's there maybe they were at the level where it wasn't blatant, but rarely is pass interference ever so blatant that it's an obvious call. And I definitely saw some stuff that made me think, yeah, pass interference was warranted in all cases where they called it. There was some grabbing in all situations. It seems like in the playoffs they try to let them play through those types of penalties more often than not. So, I guess you can't really say why. Sometimes it gets called and sometimes it doesn't. You can justify it by saying it's the playoffs and saying that you're letting them play through it, but then sometimes they do call, sometimes they don't. In the end, I guess more calls win against the Bills in this game. I guess if I'm a Bills fan, I understand being a little peeved about the officiating. But when it comes to that interception, the one that's the most controversial part. I think that play was the most important play. It was the interception play, obviously. And bottom line was, was he down? Yes, he was down for a split second. Obviously, Bills fans take the still of the guy down on the ground, and say, well, this is proof that he caught the ball. Well, you could take a still of a lot of guys catching a ball and landing on the ground, and and it would make it look as if the player had made the catch. And then in a lot of situations, a moment later, the ball will have popped out because the player didn't survive the ground. I think that's what we're seeing in this situation. Was basically, instead of not surviving the ground, the player didn't survive the defender and the ground. The combination of both. It was clear that they both had possession of the ball while they were going down. I think if there'd even been a second or two where the receiver and the defender were both lying on the ground, both with somewhat possession of the ball, they would have called it a catch. We all know that shared possession goes to the offense. But it was not. It was barely a split second where the player was on the ground and was holding the ball. And even when the player was holding the ball on the ground, even when Brandon Cooks was holding the ball on the ground, the defender had his hands around the ball, and it was less than a split second that by the time they started to even roll together, it seemed as if the defender had taken the ball. Some people are saying, well, it's a lot like that Patriots Bills interception with Marcus Jones. So I went back and looked at that play in their second matchup. About let's see, in the week what was it, 17, like 16, or yeah, I think it was week 16. And I went back and looked at that play, which was also controversial at the time, and a lot of Pats fans were claiming was an interception. And there is a difference between that Pats play and this one, and that is that in the Pats Bills game, just like I said, after both players had caught the ball, they were lying on the ground with shared possession for a second or two. Then Marcus Jones ripped the ball away. He started running the other way, and they said, no, it's a catch. That's because he had the ball for longer than a split second. At that point, it basically seemed as if even though he'd pulled the ball away, he'd been down on the ground long enough that by the time Marcus Jones stripped the ball and started to run away with it, get up and run away with it, it was pretty clear that possession had been established on the ground. This was not clear in any way, shape, or form that possession was established. So I think, I understand that it does at least seem as if, the receiver had at least shared possession of the ball while he was lying on the ground. But that, if on a ball where there's no defender and you just catch the ball and you hit the ground, that would be the same type of situation. You have to claim the same thing, that if somebody fell and hit the ground, that even if the ball popped out, well, they had possession for a moment. It's just not long enough. he just didn't have hold on to the ball long enough to establish possession of the ball. You have to survive the ground, and you have to survive the defensive player. I thought that call was correct, at least by the letter of the law. If you start changing things to the point where as soon as a player is holding a ball and he lands on the ground, then away goes this concept of being able to strip the ball after a player has it, or it becomes it doesn't go away, but it becomes a fumble. Imagine how many fumbles there would be if every single time a player possesses the ball for a half a second and the ball gets stripped away. It would be fumbles left and right. This happens a lot. And I think it would take away a lot of the excitement of I don't know. The randomness of the whole thing would just be out of control. I like the way the league does it now. They had to come up with a definition. There's a lot of one thing we've learned from all the recent uh, controversy about what is a catch and what isn't, is that there's a lot of gray area in what constitutes catches, and at a certain point you just have to come up with a definition and stick with it. I think the NFL's come up with a definition. I don't think they should change the definition. I think the rules are fine as they are. I like the idea that the offensive player has to hold the ball for more than half a second for it to be a possession. So I think the game was called correctly. I think Buffalo fans trying to blame the whole thing on that one call. I mean, I'm not trying to say it wasn't a humongous call, but if you just look at it logically from the larger term picture, it does not make sense to call a moment of possession while on the ground a catch. It just does not make sense. Surviving the ground has been a thing for a long time, and I think if you've got a defensive player on you and you don't survive the ground or the player for even a second, then it's not a catch. So that's how I'm going to weigh in. Wanted to come down hard and say I thought in the end I think the refs, I'm sure the refs didn't like the fact that it was pushed to the absolute limit by that play. They don't want to have to make these difficult calls, but there would have been uproar the other way. I mean, the Denver fans would have lost their minds if they'd called it a catch. So, and they called it by the letter of the law. That's all you can ask from the officials. I don't blame them particularly in this game. So I'm not saying this as somebody. I was rooting for the Bills. I didn't want to see those calls happen. So I didn't. I'm not saying this as somebody who's just because the Bills are in our division. That I think that they. That I want to talk shit about the refs. Talk shit about their fans complaining about the refs. This has nothing to do with that. From what I saw, the refs did the best job they could, and I think that they called it by the letter of the law. That's all you can ask from the refs. All right, so that's enough about that specific thing. The other thing is that you've turned the ball over 4 times. Everyone was expecting Josh Allen to be Superman again, and he didn't have that game. I mean, offensively he was great, but the 4 turnovers, it's just like Drake May. That's something Drake May needs to work on. Maybe that's something I haven't known this to be a problem in Josh Allen's career as far as fumbling is concerned. But some people just have bad games. Josh Allen just had a bad game. It is what it is. It's unfortunate that it came at a crucial time in a situation where the Chiefs weren't in the playoffs. But you should have beat the Chiefs when you had the chance. You shouldn't have to wait around for the Chiefs to be out of it to have a chance. So, it's like, yeah, this was a great chance, and luck was against you. But if it takes you waiting around for years until Mahomes and Lamar Jackson are out of the playoffs for you to have a shot, then you're not that great anyway. I mean, Josh Allen is a great player. There's no question about it. He's definitely. I fully believe in Josh Allen's ability to win a Super Bowl. I don't think anyone would question that. With the right team around him, he could win. But a lot of Buffalo people are up in arms. I thought McDermott generally called a pretty good game, but why wasn't he able to scheme better against Bo Nix? Why were the Broncos able to score so much? You'd think he could have come up with a better defensive scheme. Peyton is a great coach, so it's hard to blame him too much. But in order to win a Super Bowl, you got to beat great coaches, and McDermott showed that in the end, I think his game plan. I mean, offensively, his game plan was good, but I don't think that had a lot to do with him. Defensively, he was known for being a defensive-minded head coach. They did not play a defensive-minded game against the Broncos, and they should have done better. They should have been able to hold the Broncos to less than 33 points. You're not going to win many games when you give up 33 points. So unlike a lot of people I've been saying that I thought the Bills should get rid of McDermott for years now. When they lost to the Chiefs like 3 times in a row, I think it was. I think it was by the third time I was saying that McDermott cannot get over this hump. He just can't do it. There are Buffalo fans, there's Buffalo players saying, "How could you get rid of this guy?" You've had Josh Allen for what, 7 years now, something like that. Um, you know, you've gotten close, but you got to get over that hump at a certain point. It may not be McDermott's fault. It may not have been the play calling. It might have been Brandon Beane's fault. I always felt that the talent was underwhelming. You look at Buffalo and they're up. I think they're having cap issues now, and you look at their team. It's like where are the cap issues? This is not a team that has the type of names that you think would give you cap issues. I know that Josh Allen, you're paying an arm and a leg for him, but there should be, the defense should have some pass rushers on it. They don't. They have, they keep wasting time getting these old guys. They're not drafting guys that are difference makers. They draft guys that are good, not great. You need guys that are great to some extent, or at the very least, you need to coach them in a way like Vrabel does to play as a team. I don't know if maybe it's just too many pieces. They just don't draft and develop guys that really, they've got Ed Oliver, they got Matt Milano. Those are the only 2 names I really know well on defense. They every other guy on defense. I mean, they got Tre'Davious White, who had a comeback year this year, but he's been injured for most of his career. That was some bad luck there. Honestly, I think that I don't even mind that their offense is kind of hodgepodge. That he doesn't have any single great receiver to throw to. When they had Stephon Diggs, even though he and Josh Allen had a great connection, it didn't seem to make their offense, dramatically better. I feel like the Bills would be better off focusing on shoring up their defense so that Josh Allen can just play an average to above average game. Well, he's by default he almost plays an above average game. So Josh Allen can just play his game and you win with defense more. Because I feel like the biggest thing that's been lacking from the Bills in their recent attempts is the defensive issue. They just they hadn't been able to stop the Chiefs offensively. They couldn't contain the Chiefs offense. That game, that was that epic game that went to overtime where both teams were just scoring willy nilly. The defense sort of just broke down. It wasn't really there. I think the defense would be key if they want to actually have a shot. So I think they're going the wrong way if they're talking about my buddy who is the Bills fan I mentioned in the previous video is talking about getting Daboll back. I was telling him Daboll, with the Giants, I don't know who he had as defensive coordinator there, but they wasted a lot of talent on that Giants team. I fully expect the Giants pass rush to be scary next year. This year, the Pats play them on, was it Monday Night Football, I think? Or was it Sunday Night Football or Thursday night? I can't remember. But all I know is the Giants pass rush was not good. It should have been great. There's so much talent on that defensive front, and it wasn't even a remotely difficult game for the Patriots. So if I was the Bills, I'd be looking at hiring that AJ Minter guy. He was great, a great defensive coordinator in San Diego. Called a great game plan against the Pats. They had great defensive numbers for the whole season, despite not having a ton of huge difference-making players on that team. Although there was some big names on there, Derwin James and Tua Tagovailoa, whatever the heck his name is. So I was the Bills, I'd go that direction. I'd go more defense. And shame on the Bills for promoting Brandon Beane and firing McDermott. I wasn't opposed to firing McDermott, but as long as you're going to fire McDermott, also fire the guy who's made the team, given the team mediocrity as aside from Josh Allen for his entire career. And this guy gets promoted. I mean, it's like this is just another example the good old boys club. People at the top hobnobbing, and they're all buddies. And they promoted a guy who did a demonstrably bad job as the GM. Why are they promoting Brandon Bean? This guy does not deserve a promotion. Nothing he did there makes me think that if anything, I'd say Brandon Bean probably should shoulder more of the blame for their the weak personnel moves. I think the personnel moves figured more heavily into the Bills not being competitive in the AFC Championship games that they were in, or in the playoffs in general, than McDermott, who I don't love as a coach, but you wonder if McDermott will move on and find success with another GM combination. I didn't hate McDermott's coaching necessarily. This game actually, I thought on the whole he coached fairly well, at least in terms of the offense. But again, one of the most important games, the defense, his passing defense, sort of evaporated, and against Bo Nix, not super forgivable. Seems like somehow the game plan wasn't there. So who knows? But I do think it was the right move to move on from McDermott, but I do not think it was the right move to promote Brandon Bean. So we'll see what happens with the Bills. I would warn you against Daboll unless he picks a better defensive coordinator than he had in New York, because I think that the most important thing for the Bills to improve was defense. And it seems like the Bills fans just want to see, Josh Allen become even more of a Superman than he already is, and they want to see Josh Allen have weapons around him. But I really think that when it comes to, just look at the Texans. If the Texans had Josh Allen, then they would be the overwhelming favorite to win the Super Bowl. That to me is what you should be aiming at, is trying to create the Texans with Josh Allen, except in Buffalo. That's what I would be going for anyway. That's my personal opinion. But so yeah, I can't really say much else about this game. I couldn't tell you, that I watched it too in depth. All I know is 4 turnovers from Josh Allen. It was a rare bad game. Doesn't happen a lot, Hopefully, the new situation that he has puts him in a better position to win. Of course, I don't want to say hopefully that much, because I don't want to see the Bills winning the division. The window is. I'm still pissed at the Bills for not beating the Chiefs. They should have beat the Chiefs during those years. At one point, every single time they let Andy Reid and Mahomes push them around, and they did absolutely no favors to the Patriots. I think if they'd even won one of those games and at least kept the Chiefs out of the Super Bowl one time, I'd have more empathy for the Bills. But because they did absolutely nothing to stop the Chiefs from making noise about how they were going to become the new greatest dynasty of all time, and the Chiefs still do have a chance to return to prominence and threaten the greatest dynasty of all time for my Patriots. Shame on the Bills. Shame on the Bills for missing their opportunities, and shame on the Bills for not moving on from McDermott sooner and not seeing, and shame on the Bills for promoting Brandon Bean. Bad. Brandon Bean is no Billy Bean, I'll tell you that. Different sports, obviously, but you know what I'm talking about, skills. So, yeah, the Broncos moved on with the field goal. Not surprising, Will Lutz, good kicker. And, then there's, of course, the last bit I'll talk about with this game. Bo Nix, amazingly, didn't look like he broke his ankle at all. Looked like he was fine. I watched the play where they said he supposedly broke his ankle. I think I saw his leg twist for half a second, and they kind of paused the video at that point, but very hard to see. Does not look like a season-ending injury in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely devastating for Broncos fans. Even if you get past the Patriots, chances of you winning the Super Bowl with Jarrett Stidham are, in my mind, slim to none. Unless, of course, there's the possibility that Stidham is, actually been overlooked. That he actually does have talent. There's some people that used to be there, Patriots fans, still believe Stidham has something to, has some unrecognized talent. We shall see. I'm going to do a Broncos Patriots preview, so I'm not going to bother talking about it too much until then. But you could do worse for backup quarterbacks than Jarrett Stidham, I think. I think the hardest thing about that losing Nix is that he just played one of the best games of any quarterbacks, as a Broncos fan, I think you'd feel pretty confident going into the championship game with the Pats if Nix was healthy. I would imagine that the line would have been, I think the Broncos would have been favored. I think I actually heard that they were going to be favored by 3 or something like that, which is very good for a home playoff team with the number one seed. As good as the Pats have looked, it would have been a tough game against Bo Nix, and certainly feel, as soon as I saw that Bo Nix had gone out, I thought to myself, the Pats have to win now. They have to win, I could see it being a missed opportunity, and it wasn't a missed opportunity. And now the Pats are going to get their chance against Stidham. So, and they're favored accordingly. I think 5.5 points is about the right amount. I think they pretty much nailed it. And it's going to be a tough game. And I don't expect Sean Payton to bring a great game plan with his backup quarterback. But yeah, I'll talk more about that later. All I'm going to say is that it's amazing that Bo Nix somehow had season-ending ankle injury on that play. It didn't look like anything like it. It's amazing that Bo Nix was able to stay in to throw that toss to draw the pass interference call on a broken ankle. I don't know how he pulled that one off. Again, football players are just a different kind of animal. And it was a great win for the Broncos. It was a great win for Sean Payton. To some extent, Josh Allen, did you a huge favor by turning the ball over 4 times. But that doesn't mean the Broncos didn't play well. They deserve a lot of credit for, especially Bo Nix. Bo Nix looks like a guy who people aren't giving enough credit to. I think there's a good chance that he becomes that he sticks as the Broncos quarterback. It seems like as if he and Sean Payton work well together. He's already shown an ability to come back in the fourth quarter, which is important for a quarterback. So I don't think Bo Nix is the best quarterback in the league. I don't know if he'll ever be a top 5 quarterback, but I think he's starting to get into the potential top 10 conversation at this point. I'm willing to start considering him in there. Maybe top 15. He's not in the bottom half of the league. That's what I can say at the very least. And he may continue to get better. I don't know what it is that people don't like about his game. A lot of people were talking shit about the pick when he got taken out of college. I don't know enough about his game in college to have made any real judgments on that. But it looks to me like he can be a successful. I believe Bo Nix is capable of winning a Super Bowl as long as he has the right defense. And with this team, it's the Bills fans, the Broncos fans have got to be crushed that he's not going to be there because I think with Bo Nix, there's a chance this Broncos team was a Super Bowl caliber team. I wasn't afraid of them. I was more afraid of the Texans. But they're not to be taken lightly. You're talking about a team with like 4 guys who have 7+ sacks, and with Benito having the most, 14, I think it is, or something like that. I mean, crazy amount of pass rushing ability, and certainly scary as a Patriots fan for next week. So congratulations, Broncos. Sorry about your quarterback, but you'll live to fight another day. I hope you lose to my Pats next week, but I'll get into that later. Looking at the other games, as I mentioned, I always cover the Pats in a separate video, so I'm not going to talk about the Pats-Texans game because I spent an hour and a half talking about that in my other video if you want to check that out. I'm not going to say much about 49ers. Oh, first of all, I think my pick, by the way, I think I picked, let me talk about my picks real fast. My score predictions were way off for this divisional round. So I don't want to draw too much attention to it, but I did pick the Bills to win. They did not win. They did not, they didn't even cover the spread. I think, or actually, yeah, the Bills were the ones who were favored. So of course they didn't cover. The Denver covered. So I was wrong. I thought the Bills would win that game. I didn't think it was gonna. I thought it was gonna be very close, but I really thought that the Bills were the better team, and I don't think they played like some people are saying the Bills looked like the better team in that game. I mean, the better team is the better team. The Bills lost. Yeah, the turnovers are kind of fluky. What was most surprising was that Denver was able to move the ball to the tune of 30 points, which was not something I would have expected from the Denver defense, as vaunted as it was. Some people were saying that it was questionable. I wonder how much of the 30 points it scored was a result of, you know, Josh Allen versus the Denver D is overrated. I don't really know. It certainly gives me some hope for my Pats to score some points on them next week. But yeah, I forgot what my prediction was, but I was way off. So yeah, chalk that one up as an L. All right. One thing I was generally right about was Seahawks 49ers. I picked the Seahawks to win and cover. My prediction was something like I forget, it was like 25-17, I think it was, or something like that. And it wasn't even anywhere near that close. Seahawks just sort of, as soon as I saw that first run back for a touchdown, I thought, oh, you're already down a touchdown to one of the best defenses in the league. Good luck. And it just, finally, the corpse of the San Francisco 49ers, which was nothing like the team it was supposed to have been this year. You know, they looked like the team I expected them to look like against Philadelphia. It didn't take a ton of offense to beat them. It just took, a steady game plan and some turnovers from Brock Purdy, which I also do call. Of course, it was kind of hard not to see turnovers from Brock Purdy coming, so it wasn't exactly any deep insight there. Yeah, the 49ers just ran out of gas. They had a great story up to a point, but I think Shanahan was able to take advantage of a dysfunctional coaching situation in Philadelphia, and he came upon a guy who really knows what he's doing. This is Mike McDonald. He seems like a good coach. I mean, he was responsible for some great years of Ravens defense, and now he's got the Seahawks with easily one of the best defenses, maybe the best defense left in the playoffs. In fact, definitely the best defense left in the playoffs. I don't know. I guess some people might still make a case for Denver. Based on what I've seen Denver do this year, I think the Seahawks have a better defense. You know, it was just never close, and I barely really watched this game, to be honest. I think I paid attention for the first 2 or 3 drives, and it was pretty clear that the San Francisco had absolutely no juice in this game. The lack of Kittle really hurt them. It seemed like Seattle had schemed really well to stop Christian McCaffrey. It didn't seem like Pierce Saul seemed like a non-factor. The defense was swarming. It never felt like the 49ers had a shot in this game. So I didn't watch much of the game, I'll be honest with you. I don't have a lot more to say about it. I thought Seattle would win by a healthy margin, by like 8 points, I think was my prediction. They won by a hell of a lot more than that. I didn't really see a blowout coming. I didn't. I thought it was still going to be I didn't expect it to be close. I still had Seattle winning by more than a touchdown, but they won by a way more than a touchdown, and that I didn't see coming. It was 41-6, wasn't it? It was a drubbing. Sorry, 49er fans. Maybe one of these years. I think, the 49ers will be competitive next year. You lost Robert Saleh. That's a bummer. But I'm sure Kyle Shanahan will find someone else capable of running the defense. And as long as they get Warner back and Bosa back healthy, which I think they will, this 49ers team showed that they have some talent even without those guys. I think the 49ers are going to be a handful next year. Fully expect them to compete for the NFC West. I'm sorry to you 49ers fans that they had such a difficult season. It was tough to be a 49ers fan this year. It just wasn't your year. But, it seems to me like, as wild as Purdy has been, I feel like, he had enough good games to make you feel pretty good about going with him as your guy moving forward. And, we'll see. I don't know what your free agent situation is like, but I would fully expect the 49ers to be competing for the NFC West title. next year. So you got that going for you. Meanwhile, on Seattle, huge loss. Charbonnet done for the season. I know some people were saying that Kenneth Walker is a more dynamic running back presence, but having those two really good running backs helps each one to be better. They take time off of each other's workload, and I think I think Seattle fans are probably significantly disappointed about Charbonnet going out. Um, he's a great number two back, one of the best number two backs in the league, I'd say. Um, so there's a huge loss for Seattle, and I think given the fact that it's hard to rely on Darnold to be great in order to win the game. The fact that the running game, which is important for a team that mostly plays defense and wins by slow and steady, uh, smash mouth type of football. You know, what's the word? Running it down their throats. I think that was a big part of Seattle's offense. It's going to be harder to do that with just Kenneth Walker. I don't know who the backup to Charbonnet is or who they're going to be able to call up to replace him, but I don't think he's going to be as good as Charbonnet, and I think that Seattle is significantly compromised by that loss. We'll see. They still blew the pants off the 49ers. I don't think that means a hell of a lot. I think we'll really see what's up. This Seahawks Rams matchup is going to be another great one. It'll be interesting to see what happens. For as good as the Seahawks looked against the 49ers, I think it's easy for people to put too much stock into one game. I think people were, assuming that the Texans were almost unbeatable when they crushed the Steelers the way they did. But it's one game in the end. It's one game, and Seattle just had everything working that night. But it doesn't mean they're going to have everything working against the Rams. So, and certainly being down Charbonnet is not going to do them any favors. It'll be interesting. This should be this. I mean, some people are calling this the real Super Bowl. I mean, I think that if the Pats make it to the Super Bowl, then we're going to have a very exciting Super Bowl, no matter who's in it. You know, it's hard not to understate the quality of the matchup between the Rams and the Seahawks. It's going to be a hell of an NFC Championship. I expect the NFC Championship to be a hell of a lot more interesting than the AFC Championship. We shall see. I think if the Pats lose the AFC Championship, it'll be a disappointment, whereas I don't think either team will be disappointed in losing the NFC Championship because both teams have shown that they're so evenly matched over the course of the season. And this one will be, we've got the Rams coming in. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that till I'm done. So let's move on to the Rams game. All I'm saying in the end, the most boring game of the playoffs, I would say, was Seahawks 49ers. Barely worth watching. It was worth watching for about 2 or 3 drives. Then it was clear there was not going to be much of a game to see there. So yeah, I shouldn't even have talked about it as long as I did. But there you go. Finally, Rams versus the Bears, and I had this one wrong too. Everything didn't go the way I had planned it. I'd also had the Pats winning in a squeaker, and they scored 28 points. So I think that's one of the things I should have mentioned on my other video is that I said that my lock of the week was to take the under in the Pats game. Well, it went over. So I guess I don't have many locks. My locks don't look like locks at the moment. I really thought that was going to be a low-scoring game, and the Pats scored way more than I ever would have expected. But anyway, going back to the Chicago Rams, this was it's a well-fought game. I actually saw it when I was out to eat with my cousin. We had a great spot in like an elevated booth, TV right next to us. Got to eat my steak while watching the game. It's fantastic. Really good game. Didn't pay that close attention to it. I think I ended up watching the replay of the second half. Surprised at how well the Bears defense was able to perform, considering that they were down a linebacker. Surprised at how well the Bears offense was able to operate down a lineman. Really, the Bears, were extremely well coached by Ben Johnson this year. I think we're going to see the Bears be a contender for the foreseeable future, especially if Caleb Williams can improve on his completion percentage. I don't know. It seems like it's been 2 years and his completion percentage hasn't really ticked up very much. So, of course, then it's only been 1 year with Ben Johnson. So that's going to be the key is can Ben Johnson and his offensive coordinator, whoever that is, I don't know. Get Caleb Williams into more consistency. I'll tell you right now, some people still like to say that there's some argument over whether or not, if you were to redo the draft today, if you'd take Caleb Williams or Drake May first, or Jade Daniels for that matter. In my mind, no doubt, I'd take Drake May. I know he's a Patriot, so I'm biased, obviously, but you just look at their body of work so far, and Drake May looks like the guy who's the most sustainable of all of them. He's a guy who's a pocket quarterback, more than Caleb Williams, more than Jaden Daniels. Great completion percentage, smart player, learns quickly. I'll take that. I'll take that consistency over Caleb Williams. Magic. But saying that, I really expected the Rams to throw on the Bears a lot. Somehow they cobbled together a defensive game plan that worked for them because it was not the offensive explosion I expected. I think the weather had a lot to do with it. I totally forgot about the fact that it was being played in Chicago and the weather it was. So I think I predicted like a 37 to 20 something score, and it was far from that. It was a lot more of a low scoring affair than I would have expected. I'm sure the under hit well on that one. I was surprised that the game was in doubt all the way to the end. When the Rams took the touchdown lead, I said, well, we can't count him out because Caleb's done this before. He's come back before. And, especially when the Bears made that first drive and they couldn't score and they went for it on fourth down and didn't get it, I thought, well, this is it. But, they got the stop again. Somehow they managed to stop the Rams again, got the ball back, worked their way down the field, and then, of course, there was that amazing play. They started at the 14-yard line, so, the fact that the Rams were rushing, it was a good play that they rushed. But somehow Caleb runs backward, manages to get just enough space between him and the oncoming rushers to chuck a ball that really, you watch him throw it, and it's like, it doesn't even look like he's putting his all into this. He was just kind of like, fling! And that was kind of a fast fling. It just goes to show you the arm strength of Caleb Williams, because in the back, almost back left corner of the end zone, he finds his tight end commit. And, on that play, you got to wonder what it's almost like those are the kind of plays that make me worry that the NFL is scripted, because you look at Durant out there on that play, and it's kind of like, what is he doing? It's like, why would you let your man go? I don't care how long it's taken for the play to develop, and if you think your quarterback's going to get sacked, you don't leave your man in the end zone so to make a play like that possible. So the Rams cornered Durant, or is it safety? I have no idea. All I know is the guy blew it big time. Either that or he was getting some money on the side. Didn't make a lot of sense that the guy would be left wide open in that type of situation. So, great play, of course. I mean, it kind of like Caleb made it harder on himself by running backwards. Of course, he had no choice. I think they broke through that line so quickly that he had no choice but to try to give himself some space for a throw. Amazing that he was able to pull it off. Definitely shows that Caleb Williams is going to continue to have some fourth quarter magic that, it's hard to understand why he can do what he does. I suppose it's just great arm strength in the end. I'd rather have Drake May and not have to rely on fourth quarter comebacks, but I'm sure it'll make for a lot of very exciting Bears games in the foreseeable future. So then the game went to overtime. I was very surprised at the Bears' decision to kick the ball. I thought that the Bears, being limited on defense and having guys out, would want to score first and put the pressure on the Rams. Surprisingly enough, the Bears did manage to stop the Rams' drive, which was, even I thought that maybe the Rams would, at worst, be held to a field goal. The Bears' defense just, whoever came up with the defensive game plan for the Bears, I think it was Allen, they said, Dennis Allen, people were saying, is just an incredibly well-designed defensive game plan, considering what they were working with and the lack of talent on that defense. That they were able to stop the Rams in overtime, get the ball, and actually have a shot was something else. But then again, here we come back, and this is what I wanted to mention. despite Caleb's big play fourth quarter abilities, they had the ball, they had all the momentum working, they were moving down the field, they didn't need to take any chances or do anything crazy. And Caleb just, they throw a long ball, and I felt like they were moving the ball methodically. The offensive game plan was good. I didn't understand why you felt like you had to take a chuck down the field when they did. I suppose that if they completes it, then it's then you've got an easy field goal try and the game's over. But that interception from Caleb was kind of like, what are you thinking? Why would you throw it? It's like it wasn't even close to his guy. It seemed like it was right out in the middle of the defense. Seemed ripe for the picking. It's plays like that which make me think, well, as good as Caleb is and as great as his fourth quarter comeback abilities is, sometimes you'll see plays like that and you're like, what are you thinking? How does that happen? It was, I couldn't say that I felt, um, you know, I was a little. I think it's tough because my uncle's a huge Rams fan, so for his sake, I was happy when I saw the interception. I felt bad for Chicago, even though Chicago's an upstart team. They turned their season around the same way the Patriots did, and maybe not quite as dramatically. So I figure, well, Chicago will have more chances. I mean, the Rams have been in plenty of Super Bowls. They've done really well with Sean McVay, so it wasn't like the Rams needed to win this game and get to another championship. But I think that the Rams will be significantly more of a challenge for Seattle. I think Seattle would have manhandled the Bears even without Charbonnet. And I think that with a young quarterback, Caleb Williams, against that Seattle defense, it would not have been an easy game for Caleb. I'm pretty sure the Bears wouldn't have made it to the Super Bowl anyway. So I think that we got the matchup that we wanted to see in the NFC. I think it had to go earlier in the year. I was telling my uncle, I hope that we see a third Rams Seahawks matchup because that makes for a great game. So I think we're going to see a great NFC Championship here. But yeah, that pick from Caleb, it just seemed like if you're a Bears fan, that pick had to hurt. They had everything going for them. It was all moving in the right direction. I think he threw the ball on like first or second down. It wasn't even like a crucial situation. Shame on Caleb for making that mistake, even though he was the one who also got them back into the game. So I think we're going to see a lot of this. We're going to see great performances from Caleb that are sort of like, comebacks from his own ineptitude to be consistent. Until he learns to be consistent, he's going to need to make those fourth quarter comebacks. And he has it in his arm to do that, but he's also going to eventually have to learn to stop being so inconsistent. And, his ability to tie the game with that amazing play, juxtaposed with his inability to run a game-winning drive in overtime is another example of that dichotomy playing out. But anyway, Rams at that point, I felt pretty good about the Rams' chances at that point. Chicago had stopped them too many times. They'd already gotten one stop in overtime, which seemed unlikely. I had a feeling the Rams would just march down and kick a field goal, and it wasn't an easy field goal. Handed to Mevis, who I thought was a bad kicker based on the game that I saw him play against Seattle, where he missed kicks, but I didn't realize that he actually has had a pretty good year. I think he's a rookie or a young kicker anyway. He hasn't been at the team long, and hit a clutch field goal to win the game for the Rams. I felt for the Bears fans. That must have been a tough game to go to. So I'm sorry, Bears fans, but there are better times ahead for you, I'm sure, as long as Caleb can figure it out. Even if Caleb doesn't figure it out, you're going to have tons of great fourth quarter comebacks. If Caleb does figure it out, watch out. Bears are going to be a force, especially if they fix their defense. I think we'll see the Bears working on drafting some defensive pieces in the next round. Their offense looks pretty good. They're going to need a lot more defense if they want to be taken seriously as a contender, but we see the Bears fix that defense, and I'd be I'd be afraid. Ben Johnson's a good coach. Caleb Williams obviously has the talent, I think, to win with a good defense. So it's only a matter of time before the Bears start shoring up that side of the ball and becoming a contender. Be interesting to see. Bears haven't been a major force in the NFL for quite some time, and so it'll be kind of fun to watch the Bears come back. I hope they don't move to Gary, Indiana. That would be awful. Stay in Soldier Field, Bears. Don't be assholes. Pay for your own damn renovations, douchebags. All right. So yeah, great game. Much more entertaining, much closer than I thought. I guess it wasn't actually. I thought it was going to be more entertaining, so there was going to be more passing in that Rams Bears game, and it just didn't really materialize. But still, a very exciting, fun game to watch. Cool conditions. great play at the end. Had everything you could want from a playoff game. Uh, Kind of a anticlimactic finish with the Rams winning it, but I think the right team won. It was a good test for the Rams. The Rams did look like a scary team in that game, but I think that they're going to give Seattle all they can handle in the NFC Championship. It'll be interesting to see who comes away as the winner. Um, as for let's see, yeah, I guess I've already pretty much given you my thoughts on the Bears. Make Caleb Williams more consistent, get yourself a defense, and you'll be a contender. They had a great run, amazing run for a team that was as bad as they were last year. They're not quite the Patriots level of bounce back, but they're moving in the right direction. It'll be interesting to see who ends up having a better future built off of their young quarterbacks, the Bears or your young quarterbacks and their very competent head coaches, the Bears or the Patriots. So it should be fun to watch this develop in the coming years. I'll be looking forward to some Bears Patriots matchups in the not too distant future. I had picked the Rams. I thought the Rams were going to win 35 to 20 something. That did not play out. The Bears did cover the spread, and I was wrong. So yeah, I think I was in the end I was right. I picked the Pats and the Pats to cover. I picked the Seahawks to cover. Those two I was right, and my Bills and Rams pick didn't work out so well. I was right about the Rams winning at the very least. I was totally wrong about the Bills winning, so that was 50-50 against the spread. So yeah, not again. I don't consider myself a gambling guru. Um, 50-50 is okay. Nothing to write home about. So that's that. We've got only one more non-Patriots game. It'll be real easy to do this next week. I think I might combine maybe next week. No, I'll probably do a separate video. It will be a short video for Seahawks Rams, but I will be doing that as we get closer to the weekend. I'll be watching the games from home. I'm not going to be going to Boston, even though I'd like to. My cousin is having other friends over. I don't want to have to share the space with them. I feel like I let them enjoy their space. They're going to go see music and stuff, so be a lonelier weekend. It won't be quite as fun as last weekend for me in terms of the viewing experience, but there's only 2 games, so it hardly matters. All right, stay tuned for the NFC preview coming up later in the week. Hasta la vista, baby.